The mouse of the day is Rockin Rodent, and this is the first group mouse of the day. Guys, this is a band, and their music is fire. Also, don't forget to smash like and subscribe. And also, check out the link in the description or go to awesomecheesemouse.com if you want some of your own mouse of the day trading cards. Also, do you guys see in the back, I got a little mouse of the day trading card poster. Do you guys mess with it? Gruff Gary wasn't the kind of mouse you'd expect to be fronting a band. He was rough around the edges, a little loud, and known for spending most of his evenings at the Rusty Cheddar Tavern. Gruff Gary was also known for being in this band, Rockin Rodent. But beneath that gruff exterior was a voice that could shake the rafters, a voice that had drawn the attention of Dizzy Darrell, a fast-talking drummer with more energy than a mouse running from a cat, and Slick Rick, the electric guitar player who could make his guitar squeal and wail, nothing like any other mouse in the world had ever heard before. Together, the three of them formed Rockin Rodent, the loudest, wildest mouse band in the whole village. They didn't play the kind of sweet, delicate music you might expect from mice. No, Rockin Rodent was all about raw, unfiltered sound. Music that was just super wild. It would vibrate the entire tavern and get people's hearts racing. It all started with the drummer, Darrell, who had been tapping out beats on the bar top at Rusty Cheddar for as long as anyone could remember. He overheard Gary singing an old tune in the back corner of the tavern. Gary wasn't even trying to sing, really. He was just having fun, half dizzy from all those cheese drinks he had, and half remembering a song from his youth. But when Darrell heard that deep, raspy voice, something clicked. The rhythm in Gary's voice matched with the beats in Darrell's head, and he knew right then and there that they had the perfect sound for their frontman. That night, Darrell convinced Gary to join him for an impromptu jam session in the tavern. Slick Rick was already there, and he was carrying his guitar, eager to show off a new riff. When Gary stepped up to the mic and let loose, Rick jumped in with his electric guitar, and the two of them instantly connected. The raw power of Gary's voice paired with Rick's sharp guitar riffs created a sound unlike anything the tavern had ever heard before. By the end of the night, the three of them were surrounded by an audience of stunned, wide-eyed mice, all demanding more, and thus Rockin Rodent was born. It had been a few months since that fateful night, and Rockin Rodent was beginning to make a name for themselves in the village. But it wasn't just about music. Being in a band meant they were a team, and like any team, they had challenges. "Gary, you can't keep showing up late to practice," Darrell said one afternoon, his drumsticks clicking together in frustration. They were in their makeshift studio, which was really an old storage room behind the tavern. It wasn't glamorous, but it had character, and most importantly, it had good acoustics. Gary, who was still recovering from too many cheese drinks yesterday, said, "I'm here, ain't I?" Darrell rolled his eyes. "Yeah, but we've got a big gig next week, and we need to have this Swiss on lock if we're going to impress everyone." Rick, who was casually tuning his guitar, chimed in, "Gary, man, we get it. You're the star and all, but we got to be more than that. We got to be solid. Every great band is more than just one mouse." Gary grunted, his deep voice rumbling through the room. "You think I don't know that? I've been around the block, kid. I know what it takes." Darrell sighed. All right. Let's just run through the set list one more time. If we can nail it today, we'll be in good shape." Gary slouched over the mic while Rick started strumming a few notes to warm up. As soon as Gary opened his mouth, the gruffness of his voice filled the room, pulling Darrell and Rick into the music like a magnet. No matter how frustrated they were with Gary, there was no denying his talent. But being in a band wasn't just about the music. It was all about surviving the ups and downs, the conflicts and the egos. And Gruff Gary, he was nothing but ego. A few days later, the band decided to take a break from practice and head to Mousetown Park, a quiet spot where they could clear their heads. It was Gary's idea. "Sometimes you gotta get out of the noise to figure out the sound," he said. They lounged on a patch of grass near the pond, watching the other mice go about their day. Gary leaned back against a rock, squinting at the sky as if the clouds held the answers to all of life's problems. "You know, I never thought I'd end up in a band," Gary said after a long silence. "I figured I'd just live out my days singing to myself in the tavern or something." Darrell snorted. "Yeah, we'd all be missing out on your golden voice." Gary smirked. "Golden, huh? You got away with words, kid." Rick, who had been sitting by himself plucking at a blade of grass like it was a guitar string, glanced up. "What about you, Gary? Why'd you even agree to join us? You don't seem like the band type." Gary was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowing in thought. I guess, I don't know. I like being on stage. I like that energy. I like hearing everyone cheer. But it's more than that. When I sing, it feels like the only time I'm real. Everything else is just noise." The other two mice looked at him, surprised, the rare glimpse of vulnerability from Gary. He quickly shook it off with a shrug and a gruff laugh. "Besides, you two jokers need me. Without me, who'd keep you in line?" Darrell chuckled, tossing a pebble into the pond. "Yeah, you're probably right about that, Gary." The three of them sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun dip lower into the sky. Even though they fought, even though they struggled to keep things together sometimes, there was no denying that Rockin Rodent was more than just a band. They were a family in their own way. As the big gig approached, tensions rose again. This wasn't just another tavern show. This was their chance at the Cheese Jam, the biggest underground mouse music festival in the region. It was the opportunity that they had been waiting for, but with this pressure came more fights, more late-night rehearsals, and more moments where it seemed like it might not all come together. One night, after an especially frustrating practice where nothing seemed to go right, Gary stormed out, slamming the door behind him. "I'm done with this," he shouted, his voice echoing through the empty street. "I'm not just some kid chasing a dream. I don't need this." Daryl and Rick sat stunned in silence for a moment. They had seen Gary angry before, but this was different. It felt final. But then as they sat there in the silence of their little studio, something shifted. Rick, who had just been staring down at his guitar, slowly started playing. Softly at first, there was just a few notes, but then building into a melody that seemed very familiar. Daryl picked up his drumsticks and started tapping along, a slow, steady rhythm that matched the mood. The two of them played for what felt like hours, losing themselves in the music, letting it carry them wherever it wanted to go. And then, just as suddenly as he left, the door creaked back open and Gary walked in. He didn't say a word, he just stepped back up to the mic, closed his eyes, and began to sing. Daryl and Rick didn't stop playing. There was no need. They didn't need to ask him why he was gone or why he came back. In that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was the music, and as Gary sang, the tension that was building between them for days just melted away. The melody Rick had started was slow and soulful, and Gary's voice, as gruff as ever, fit it perfectly. It wasn't their usual high-energy rockin' sound, but that's what made it work. The rawness of it, the emotion. It was what they'd all been missing out on. Even when they were at odds, the music brought them back together. Gary opened his eyes on the last note as it faded away, and for the first time in a while, he wasn't frowning. He was breathing hard, but he wasn't angry. He looked tired. "That was something," Gary muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. He wasn't great with feelings, but the guys could tell something had shifted inside him. Daryl put his drumsticks back down and leaned on his seat, grinning. "Told you we were getting better, Gary. You can storm out all you want, but we'll still be here when you want to come back." Gary snorted but didn't argue. Instead, he sat down on the old stool by his mic, his tail flicking back and forth in thought. "I know, I've been rough sometimes," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "But this band, you guys, this is the closest thing I've got to a family." Rick, always the quiet one, smiled softly as he tuned his guitar. "We're not just a band, Gary. We've been through too much for that." The three of them sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Gary stood up, cleared his throat, and gave them one of his rare, crooked smiles. "All right, enough of that mushy stuff. Let's get back to work. We've got a festival to play." Daryl and Rick laughed, but they knew Gary was serious. With the Cheese Jam just a few days away, they needed to be at their best. The festival was their chance to show the world what Rockin Rodent was made of, and they weren't about to let anything get in their way. The next few days of rehearsals were a lot. Late-night jam sessions, tweaking their set list to make sure everything was perfect. There were still disagreements, sure. Gary was always pushing for more grit in the sound, while Rick preferred to focus on the melodies a little bit more. But through it all, they kept the bigger picture in mind. Rockin Rodent was more than just three mice playing music together. They were a unit, and every note, every chord was a reflection of that bond. Finally, the day of the Cheese Jam had arrived. The festival grounds were packed with mice all over, buzzing with excitement as they moved between the different stages. They were grabbing snacks from the cheese stands and talking about which bands they were most excited to see. Backstage, Rockin Rodent was setting up, and their nerves and excitement were mingling as they prepared for the biggest show of their lives. Gary was pacing back and forth, muttering to himself as he ran through the lyrics in his head. Daryl was tapping out a few beats on his knees. Rick was carefully tuning his guitar. His focus was razor sharp. "You guys ready?" Daryl asked, glancing up from his imaginary drum kit. Gary grunted. "As ready as I'll ever be." Rick gave a small nod, his eyes focused on the strings in front of him. "Let's do it." The lights on the main stage dimmed, and the crowd began to cheer as the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Rockin Rodent!" "Oh!" The roar from the crowd was deafening as the three mice took the stage. Daryl sat behind the drum kit, Rick strapped on his guitar, and Gary took his place at the mic, his gruff voice ready to tear through the night. But as they looked out over the sea of mice, something shifted. This wasn't another performance. This was the culmination of everything they had worked for so long. Those late-night rehearsals, the arguments, and the moments of doubt. It had all led to this. They launched into their first song, and the crowd responded immediately, their paws in the air, moving to the rhythm of Daryl's drums and Rick's guitar. Gary's voice, raw and powerful as ever, was cutting through the night like a bolt of lightning, drawing everyone in. But this wasn't just a performance. The real magic happened between the songs, when the three bandmates looked at each other and knew without saying a single word that they were exactly where they were meant to be. It wasn't about being perfect or having the biggest crowd. It was about the music, the bond they shared, and the fact that no matter what happened at all, they had each other's backs. By the time they finished their set, the crowd was on their feet cheering and shouting more than ever, but instead of basking in the applause, Gary turned to his bandmates, a rare, genuine smile on his face. "We did it, guys," he said with pride. Daryl grinned, tossing one of his drumsticks in the air. "Told you we'd get here." Rick simply nodded, his quiet satisfaction evident in the way that he held his guitar. And as they walked off into the night, ready to face whatever came next, they knew one thing for sure: the music would always bring them back together. So do you guys mess with Rockin Rodent?